we will start with AJ Lee because she has been, as you guys know, the biggest talking point of the entire professional wrestling world over the past week and a half or so now. And I think that when you look at just how the return has played out, I've said it in the previous video I did on the channel, I don't think you could have asked for anything better when it comes to how this entire thing was set up, the reaction from the crowd. I've mentioned and, we've laughed about just these social media views. WWE is putting out new numbers, it seems like, they just go up and up and up in terms of the millions upon millions of views and engagements that this return has had. Made the big return on SmackDown, had the follow-up on Raw, where she had the interaction with Becky Lynch to officially set up the tag team match at WrestlePalooza, AJ Lee and CM Punk versus Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins. And so, now that we know that AJ is back after a decade, we also know that this tag team match is just the beginning. And I think it's fun to kind of look ahead to all the possible matches on the horizon and these different feuds and rivalries that you can work with, because that's what it's all going to be about, right? Everyone's going to remember the initial pop and just the reaction from this first week. But if you don't follow up on it in an effective way, then, people may look back 6 months from now and say, man, they really dropped the ball with that return. I don't think that's going to be the case because I think there's too many things right now that WWE can look at and just be salivating over when it comes to all the potential feuds that you can get with AJ. And, we'll see how it goes in terms of the in-ring stuff at WrestlePalooza. A tag team match is different from singles matches, but I think when you look at her, she's looked like she hasn't aged a day since the last time we saw her on WWE television. And so I think she's probably going to be just fine there when it comes to being able to, carry a very large load in these singles matches that she's going to have down the road. And so we're going to start with my top 5. And I could probably expand this even further, but we'll start with number 5. And I think this is kind of, for me, an interesting one that is probably not going to happen in the near future. And the reason why is because it's not physically possible for this to happen in the near future. Why? Because Naomi's having a baby. But I do think AJ Lee versus Naomi at some point in the future would be excellent. We know how good Naomi has been on social media. On X, she has put out some pretty great tweets already regarding AJ Lee's return. And you're going to see kind of a theme in my top 5 here. We've always talked about, like with AJ Lee, the title of her book, right? It's crazy as my superpower. And so some of these sort of, characters, if you want to call it that, in WWE, especially perhaps some of the heels, although, as you're going to see, there's some babyface options, I think, as well. But I just think you're looking at a fun dynamic if you were to have these two interacting, going back and forth. AJ Lee and Naomi, we mentioned how great Naomi was in this, current iteration that she's been in before she now has to take the time off. I just think it's something where it would be pretty tremendous to see these two interact on a weekly basis and get to an eventual match. And just knowing, again, I think Naomi's not the only one who can play up the idea that here comes this legend who is making her return and trying to get in the way of everything that's going on right now and trying to interrupt all this progress, right, that Naomi feels like she's made. And so Naomi telling AJ Lee to proceed with caution, I think, would be quite a fun dynamic with those two. So again, this is a future long-term type option in terms of AJ Lee matches, but I think, you're probably looking at a scenario where, for me, this is one that would be a lot of fun. AJ Lee versus Naomi would be now number 5 on my top AJ Lee return matches in WWE. All right, number 4, I think, is probably one that some people may have a little bit higher on their list if they're ranking their top AJ Lee return matches. And I know this person probably has it as number 1, wants to be the number 1 person on the list. And there's no doubt if this person is ranking dream matches, AJ Lee would be her number 1 opponent, most likely. And number 4 is Roxanne Perez. And we know the history. They've showed the photos, in the past of these two and just kind of the fun dynamic of the first photo you see, and then here they are a decade later. And Roxanne is all grown up now, one of the top rising stars in the WWE women's division. And, you have the whole dynamic there where you can play off of, Roxanne's love for AJ Lee and how that can be sort of, fuel for some kind of storyline. And we know, anything you kind of put AJ in at this moment, she is going to be cheered. I don't know that you'll ever be able to turn AJ Lee at any point in the future just based on kind of the way that, she plays it up. But it's possible. And so you could, maybe look a year down the line and say, all right, well, maybe we're back to an AJ Lee who, decides she wants to play up a little bit more of the darker side or something like that. But I think for now, Roxanne, remember the Judgment Day. We know Roxanne's got a big feud herself coming with Liv Morgan whenever Liv makes her return. And so I think that AJ versus Roxanne, it's a natural match. I've already seen some people saying, why don't you do this for WrestleMania 42? Go ahead and give Roxanne her dream match. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but this is one they're going to get to at some point. There's no doubt about it. This has to be on the list of AJ Lee feuds, and I think this is one too. Look, they've had Roxanne, in the tag team role out of necessity after Liv's injury, but this is also the type of feud and rivalry that can elevate Roxanne even further, where, maybe she comes out of it and all of a sudden that star has risen even further than what it already is. As we said, just someone who clearly is one of the top rising stars in the women's division, will probably be the face of the women's division at some point in the next several years. And so AJ Lee versus Roxanne, a layup here to conclude on my top 5 AJ Lee return matches. Okay, number 3, and this is where it got a little tougher for me to separate how I wanted to put the top 3 here. And, again, I think there's multiple kind of options for what you can work with on this. But at number 3, I am going to settle on AJ Lee versus Becky Lynch, because we're going to get that at some point, right? It's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen sooner rather than later. Of course, they've played up the idea that even beyond this tag team match with AJ wearing the Women's Intercontinental title and all this other stuff, you're going to have that match, and I think it's just probably a question of when you're going to have it. If we're doing way too early predictions, which next week's long-form episode here on Wrestling Reaction Weekly will be our full WrestlePalooza preview, but if I'm doing a way too early prediction, I just feel like this seems pretty clear as to how they want this to unfold, potentially there, where maybe AJ gets the pin on Becky, that sets up your eventual singles match between those two. Seems fairly obvious, and so maybe that's not the route they will go, but it's a highly anticipated match, and these two on the microphone we've already seen have been able to deliver some very fun and exciting verbiage here to, escalate the tension in this feud and all of that stuff. And so this may, as I said with the previous one, be higher on other people's lists, but for me, I think, it's probably, I'm not knocking it, but you're going to get to see these two in the ring at WrestlePalooza in a tag team match, so maybe that takes down the singles match just a little bit because it's going to be something we've already seen with them interacting and all of that, but nonetheless, it's a huge match. It's probably the biggest match of this entire list that I have that WWE could do, AJ Lee versus Becky Lynch. It's going to be more of that high-profile feel than maybe some of the others on this list, but I think, again, it's one that is going to be pretty spectacular once we get to it. It is a dream match for a lot of people, and I think it will absolutely deliver. So Becky versus AJ, it was going to be on this list somewhere. You guys knew that. Probably higher for some people, but I'm going to leave it at number 3 here for now. All right, we get to the top 2, and number 2 on my list, AJ Lee versus Bayley. Because, this whole thing they've been doing with Bayley over the past several weeks, I think has been pretty fascinating. And how it plays out, I don't know exactly. They've kind of added Lyra Valkyria into the story here, and maybe that's kind of the initial part of this whole thing for Bayley as she turns into whatever it is she's going to be coming out of this. Does she go back to the heel Bayley? Does she go back to the hugger? Does she play all these different roles? Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Mankind, Dude Love style? I don't know. She could do all kinds of things based on kind of the different iterations of Bayley we've seen over the years. But again, you have a little bit of history here with Bayley and AJ Lee. I think it's one where it would be pretty fascinating to me to see the new Bayley, whatever that is, interacting with AJ Lee. I think that would be something that, for me would be very entertaining just to see how these two play off of each other. But there are some unknowns, as I said, not knowing exactly what Bayley is going to be moving forward. And also, as we mentioned, this is a dream match list in terms of your ranking, so it doesn't have to be a match that you get to now. It can be something that you do 6 months from now or further down the road. But I would really be excited about this one. I think it would be just kind of seemingly with the direction they're going with Bayley. I feel like this is one where there's a lot you could work with here, historic stuff based on kind of the interactions from these two in the past. And so I have Bayley at number 2 on my list of AJ Lee return matches. And that brings us to number 1. And this is one that I really thought about because I was like, well, initially Becky probably could be the choice for a lot of people. Like I said, Roxanne Perez could be a high choice for a lot of people. Maybe Bayley's on there. Other people, Rhea Ripley, Stephanie Vaquer. Like, there are a lot of different people that you could choose from. Bianca Belair, Charlotte Flair, Alexa Bliss, Jade Cargill, Tiffany Stratton. Like, you just keep going down the line, right? But for me, this would be, of all the return matches for AJ Lee, this would probably be the one I would anticipate the most in terms of the potential outcomes you could get from having these two interact. And that is AJ Lee versus Liv Morgan. Because we've said it, Liv has become one of the top stars, not just in the women's division, but in the entire company throughout this run she's had over, it all runs together for me, guys, over the past, year and a half or so, however long it's been. Like, Liv has been fantastic. And I know she's sidelined with the injury now. I think when she returns, it's only going to make that even bigger in terms of her star power, because that return pop for Liv is going to be incredible. And I think having those two, given what Liv has become, and kind of seeing that these two, again, we talk about sort of the way they play each other and sort of having sort of that ticking sort of time bomb with these two where at any moment you feel like they can just snap. I feel like that would make for a lot of sort of entertaining, back and forth between AJ Lee and Liv Morgan. And I think that's why, for me, she's number 1 on the list, just because I don't want to say Liv is like the new AJ, right? But if you really think about kind of the direction that both have went in their careers and how they kind of rose to the spot that they got to at the pinnacle that they were in their WWE career, which for now you could argue AJ could be back at it right now just because of making a return. But it was a similar trajectory where it took a little bit for it to completely, take off, right? In terms of like the fans were connecting at the start, but then it was that one little swap, right? That one little character change, that one little kind of just shift in how they presented them. It was everything, and that was kind of for AJ, right? She just became this person who they just started to click with fans. With Liv, it just started to click because really the heel turn and the way, pairing her with Dominic and all this other stuff, everything just started to click. And I think, that to me is kind of just, it's a wild thing to think about because it's very unpredictable, how people are going to eventually get to that kind of top spot. And there's no doubt Liv has gotten there. And again, we know AJ in the past rose to the level that not many women have gotten to in WWE throughout the years. And now that she's back, one of the hottest topic in professional wrestling, Liv Morgan, AJ Lee, sign me up. I don't care if it's WrestleMania. I don't care where the match happens. The feud, the rivalry, I think to me, that is the one that I would be most interested in for AJ Lee's return matches in WWE. My question of the week for you guys on the way out, you can hit me up on Twitter/X at WrestleBlake, or you can leave your comments on YouTube or the podcast. If you want to leave a nice 5-star review with your answer to the question, it is, which AJ Lee match are you most looking forward to? Give me your top opponent for AJ Lee. Which one? I gave you my 5 earlier. Naomi at 5, Roxanne Perez at 4, Becky Lynch at 3. It was Bayley at 2, had to remember there for a second, and Liv Morgan at 1 for me. Give me your thoughts. Who are you most looking forward to seeing AJ Lee hook up with in the ring in WWE? Boy, I realize now how terrible of a phrased sentence that was. AJ Lee return matches. That's what we're asking here. I appreciate you guys.